Hello, we are back with another video. Now, I don't know if I've explained this, but the reason that I'm sitting here on this strange sofa bed is twofold. One, eventually I want to make this into a reading paradise. So there'll be books and, I don't know, decorative things. But right now it's just a blank space. Second reason is, I think that sitting like this, what do you call it, crisscross applesauce, is the most comfortable way to sit ever. I mean, not constantly, 24 hours a day. You shouldn't be sitting in the same position 24 hours a day, generally, even if you're sitting in a chair. But I think that this is the most comfortable way to sit. I don't like chairs. Chairs are boring and uncomfortable, and I'm really disappointed in society that we still use them. Like, why? Look at this, so comfortable. Anyway, if you don't find it comfortable, then you are the problem. No judgment here. If you don't find it comfortable or if you have a particular reason you need to sit in a chair, then that's fine. But for me personally, I really wish I could sit like this always. That would be the dream. If I could just go throughout my life, popping down on the floor on a slightly elevated, comfortable area like this, and sit like this. That is the ultimate goal. 2020, when will we arrive in a society that lets us sit like this most of the time? Well, that had nothing to do with what we are going to be talking about today, which is our first video on fallacies. I would like to go through the most common fallacies that you find in writing and speaking and talk about why they are problematic. So we're going to start today and we're going to talk about 3 things. 1, what is a fallacy? 2, what is rhetoric? And 3, we're going to talk about the easiest to understand fallacy. Let's go. There are many definitions of fallacies, which I will link some of them to this video, but I thought I would start out with my own definition of fallacy that is kind of a conglomeration of a bunch of definitions together. I like to think of a fallacy as a faulty argument, or to put it dramatically, an argument that was doomed from the beginning. So an argument that does not work. Now, why doesn't it work? Well, a fallacious argument, or a person who is using a fallacious argument, will, instead of countering the points of the argument that they are meant to counter, or instead of refuting the points that they are meant to refute, they will instead respond in a completely different way that distracts from the real point and the real argument. And there are many different ways you can do this. You can commit fallacies in so many ways. Now, alongside of the idea of a fallacious argument, I also want to talk briefly about rhetoric. Well, again, my definition is the art of arguing well. It's a conglomeration of definitions I have heard over the years, but I will link an official one to this video. A person with a strong rhetorical argument will respond directly to whatever points have been brought up and counter them head on, directly relating their points to whatever points had been brought up previously. So it's boom. And this is more difficult to do than it would seem. It is really difficult to stay track when you are making an argument, whether you're making that argument on paper or in public when you are speaking. I think it's probably more difficult to stay on track when you're speaking because you are speaking in real time. And when you're speaking, you can feel nervous, emotional, distracted, you can have a headache or whatever. When you're writing, you can always just put your writing down and come back to it later. When you're speaking, you can't be like, oh wait, pause guys, I'm just feeling a little bit out of sorts here. I'm sorry you all came to hear me, but I've got to take a break. So unfortunately, we can't do that when we're speaking. So it's probably easier to have a rhetorically sound argument in writing than when you are speaking. This is why people who debate and people who speak often practice a lot so that their points can be boom, without going all over the place, without making a point that is not related, without distracting their audience with something that's not rhetorically sound. I want us to look at a couple of examples of the first type of fallacy that we're going to talk about. The first big mistake that anyone can make when arguing, the first fallacy that a person can commit. I'm going to try to choose examples that are pretty clear-cut and obvious so that you can see the difference really well. And then when it comes to looking at the media, looking at the news, looking at different arguments that you can encounter in your life, just know it's not always going to be so obvious, these fallacies. For the purposes of this video, I want you to see very obviously. But unfortunately in life, things are not always so clear. Sometimes they are ambiguous. The first type of argument that we are going to be looking at this week is the ad hominem attack against the man. The man. Who is this person? It could be an attack against the other person in the debate. It could be an attack against another person of a competing company or organization. It could be an attack against another student in your class. An ad hominem attack, instead of refuting the other person's points, will say, don't listen to this person because this person is bad, this person is incompetent, this person is stupid, or whatever. It will be an obvious attack against that person's character that has nothing to do with whatever points they are making. And this is a clear fallacy because it is more than possible to be a sort of bad person, or maybe to not have the greatest character, and to still have a good idea or argument. Just because the person might not be the best person, if the attack is true about the person, does not invalidate that person's argument. They could still be speaking a good, valid argument. And so a good arguer or a good analyst will need to separate those things and say, okay, this person might have done blah, 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 all these terrible things, maybe, but this argument that this person has brought up is still valid for blah, 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 blah. And we will look at an example of that in a moment. All right, so we're going to talk about rhetoric, the art of speaking or writing effectively, skill in the effective use of speech. So this is just from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, online dictionary, which I will link in the video description. We've also got fallacy. Fallacy is a kind of error in reasoning. Fallacies may be created unintentionally, or they may be created intentionally in order to deceive other people. And so I think that in the first place, before we go into talking too much about fallacies, we should remember it's really important to be kind when we're getting into more personal arguments, for example, with our families, because these arguments are often full of fallacies because they're super emotional experiences. It's a completely different thing to commit a fallacious or to create a fallacious argument when you're having a family or a friend argument than to intentionally deceive people as, for example, a politician or as a journalist or as an academic or whatever. Those are definitely different things. So I don't think it's particularly helpful to point out, oh, you're being fallacious right now if you're arguing with someone you're close to. That is a completely different situation than presenting yourself on a political stage or on a journalistic stage or presenting yourself as an authority on a particular subject. I will link this page in the description below. So the first one we're going to talk about is ad hominem because it is the most obvious. The idea of ad hominem being a fallacious form of argument has been around for a long time. The outlining of ad hominem as an argument is often credited to Aristotle, the Greek philosopher. Ad hominem comes from the Latin, which means to the person. So an attack against or toward, an attack towards the person, an argument that attacks the character of the person without addressing the substance of their argument. Now, there are many, many, many examples in your life, I'm sure, and in our modern day politics, but I wanted to look at an example that is particularly old. Now, as far as ad hominem attacks go, there are many, many, many examples in the media, particularly with how polarized we are right now. And I'm not super interested in analyzing those because there are lots of people who have already done that, and they've already done that well. I also want you to think critically about what you view in the news, and I hope that you can identify ad hominem attacks
when you see them. The example that we're going to be looking at is quite old. It's from the Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers were infamous for their ad hominem attacks against each other. They love to insult each other. Political insults are an old form of discourse. So, let's get into it. Yet I lose all patience when I think of a bastard brat of a Scotch peddler daring to threaten to undeceive the world in their judgment of Washington by writing a history of his battles and campaigns. So this was John Adams. In a letter to Benjamin Rush on the 25th of January in 1806, he was referring to Alexander Hamilton. John Adams famously hated Alexander Hamilton. They had major political differences, and right here we have a pretty classic example of an ad hominem attack. So he's calling him a bastard brat, which is a pretty strong insult, a bastard brat of a Scotch peddler, daring to threaten to undeceive the world in their judgment of Washington. So what John Adams seems to be so angry about is that Alexander Hamilton is going to be writing about battles and campaigns that had happened and publish his writings, which would cause political upheaval. Now, to be fair to John Adams, this insult was written in a letter. So it is not the same thing as John Adams going to a newspaper and publishing this claim. However, he is talking about politics in this particular example. His anger at Hamilton's decision to publish his own version of this particular history doesn't seem to be rooted in a legitimate critique of that history, but instead a sort of anger that he is a bastard brat of a Scotch peddler, which does not refute anything. So that is an example of a classic ad hominem. Alright, so a classic ad hominem that you may have come across in your life is "Don't listen to her, she's only a girl," or some version of this. It has nothing to do with your ability to argue, has nothing to do with your ability to analyze anything. It is just an insult. Don't listen to her, she's only a girl. Another classic ad hominem is, "Oh, he's a Democrat," or "she's a Democrat, Republican, so he's biased." And while that may be true, that might distract from the fact that this person might be making a particularly good point. Or maybe this person is giving you good information. Maybe they are biased, but maybe the information they're saying in that moment is good. So it's not relevant that they're a Democrat or Republican. Now, it can be sometimes, but not always. So those type of he or she or they are this, so that, those are often forms of ad hominem attacks, meaning don't listen to this person because of blah, 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 whatever reason. While, of course, thinking about the character of our politicians is really important, is not necessarily always relevant to the information that you are receiving right then and there. There could be someone on the political stage that you completely disagree with that is actually, for whatever reason, in that moment giving you good information. And so, as careful digesters of the modern day media, it's super important to try to look past your own distaste for a particular person and cut through that stuff to the information that that person might be giving, which could be good information to the best of our knowledge at this point. So an ad hominem is a classic attack. It is an insult against the person and not an attack against whatever argument that person is making. The President of the United States loves to use ad hominem attacks, whether or not it's for a dramatic effect or for clicks or whatever. That remains to be seen, or that is up for debate. But if you want to go looking for an classic ad hominem attack, then look no further than the White House.
Alright guys, I hope that was helpful. Remember, the first fallacy to be avoided is the ad hominem attack against a person's character instead of a direct refuting of that person's argument. Even if what has been said about that person's character is true, it does not invalidate that person's argument. Those are separate things. Alright, see you next week. Bye.